So welcome to this presentation. The title of the presentation is Learner Agreements, Pedagogy and Practice for Blended Online Learning. And it's being delivered by myself, Dr. Sean Morrissey, Dr. Katie Savage and Dr. Emma Compton-Daw, and we're colleagues in the Organisational and Staff Development Unit and the Academic Development Team in particular at the University of Strathclyde. So the context of this is, across the higher education sector in the UK, many of us are grappling with the challenges of delivering really positive student experiences through blended and online curricula. And that challenge has obviously increased in pace and tempo with the coronavirus pandemic that we're all still very much in the midst of at the moment. And while technology can be used to deliver, really great flexible learning experiences, offering participants the opportunity to access teaching materials and assessment in a kind of flexible manner in terms of time, space and place, it can also have a really disruptive influence on some of the expectations of both teachers and students, and particularly those for whom blended and online learning might be relatively unfamiliar. So in this session, what we're going to do is to reflect on the experience of introducing module level learner agreements across a number of taught postgraduate modules that we deliver. And we'll look at the impact of the learner agreement on a number of metrics, participant retention, participant engagement, and also in terms of streamlining some of the administrative tasks around kind of enrolment of students into those modules. So this is really for us a story of how the online space creates both kind of challenges but also opportunities for enhancing the student experience and also enhancing our experience as teachers and those who administer these modules. But just before we begin, I think it's useful to do a little bit of disambiguation. So this presentation, of course, has the term learner agreements within the title. And we're very much aware that the literature describes the practice and pedagogy of learner contracts in quite specific detail. Learner contracts, of course, are very popular, if not actually commonplace in certain approaches to adult or work-based learning. And so for learners and supervisors, the process of writing up and working through a learner contract might involve quite a formalized approach to negotiating learner objectives, a program of study that might take into account, prior learning and some of the specific competencies to be developed, methods of assessment and deadlines for completion. And so when we think about learner contracts in this context, there are lots of kind of signature elements, a learner plan, a supervisor and a student, and regular supervisory meetings, a process of negotiation. And that's not really what we're talking about. That's not really what we have in mind when we use the phrase learner agreements. Although, we have been very much influenced by, I think, some of the principles of the literature on learner contracts. Our agreement probably is a bit more similar to a code of conduct, or this really nice phrase that we've come across in the literature, a community covenant. With that community involving ourselves as tutors and the class of learners, and the covenant being a simple agreement that kind of informs the various parties about some of the kind of basic expectations that we feel are essential to a productive learner environment, but that also allows a conversation to take place and elements of those expectations to come to the fore and be discussed and in some cases negotiated. But what I will say about this and how the learner agreements that we have in mind relates to the literature on learner contracts, I think familiarising ourselves with some of the literature on learner contracts in the broader sense has really inspired us to think about some of the next stages of the development of this process for us. For instance, we're thinking about how our learner agreements can be more personalised, how they can elicit greater participation from the learner. Is there scope for the co-creation of learner agreements rather than simply presenting them to the learners and asking them for their consent? So certainly things that we'll touch on at the very end of this presentation. And the final wee bit of disambiguation is just to point out that the focus of the presentation is not only on the learner agreement itself, but it's about the kind of first stage of a participant's engagement with a new blended or online module. So that process that involves enrolment, reading and signing the learner agreement, participating in some pre-boarding activities. We're going to discuss kind of all of this within a little bit of context, the context of where that's been challenging and where that's provided us with opportunities to try and innovate, making use of the virtual learning environment in particular to create a much more seamless process for students to enter and start to engage with our modules. So I think it's over to Katie next to talk about the context of the programme that we deliver, and then we'll come back to look at the role of learner agreements within the context of some of the actual modules within that programme.
Thanks, Sean. So I'll just give a little bit of context around the classes in which we trialled the learning agreements. So we are using them in Strathclyde's Credit Bearing Spark programme, which is Strathclyde's programme for academic practice, research development and knowledge exchange. So this encompasses our PG Cert programmes. We run PG Cert programmes in learning and teaching, as well as in research development and knowledge exchange. We're experiencing some changes in the programme. For example, the popularity of our classes is really increasing. For some classes, particularly the core learning and teaching class, it has now been made a necessary class as part of the probation requirement for new academic staff to the university. And this has resulted in a massive increase in subscription. We're also looking ahead to our Vision 2025 at Strathclyde, and the university has a vision to employ around 400 more academic staff by then. So when we look at that increase that we have ahead of us for the programme, combined with the normal turnover that we deal with in the programme, we're aware that we really need to think about being efficient and finding efficient ways to support our participants through the programme. We operate a waiting list opportunity at the minute, and we do find that our waiting lists are getting larger and we're having to repeat classes a little bit more often. So we're already starting to see that build in the number of staff and the number of staff looking to take the programme. Also, one of the other reasons for including a learner agreement is about the way that our classes work. We really have a sort of signature pedagogy that's based around group work, having participants work together on projects, collaborating projects, working together to construct learning resources. So this has really led to part of the idea for introducing that. This can be a different way of working for some participants, and we really felt we needed to have a way to make it clear to them what we expected of them, but also what they could expect from us too. That can't be a one-way street, but it's allowed us to really talk to them about being a good participant and how to engage with tutors and with their peers within the classroom. We have been moving to a much more online format over the past few years. Of course, we are reaping the benefits of that now because we were able to pivot relatively easily over the last couple of months in response to COVID-19. But also the learner agreements was a response to this change to online, so that again we could be quite clear with our participants about what their roles and responsibilities were in the class. Okay, thanks, Sean. If you could pop to the next slide.
Thank you. So I'm just going to talk through a little bit more of the rationale for the introduction of learner agreements, and at the same time give you the opportunity to have a look at some of the kind of statements in our participant and learner agreements. So we know from the excellent student insights surveys that JISC have carried out that many learners arrive at university or in further education with a whole wide array of expectations about their learning, and in particular their learning in the digital space. And we've certainly experienced within the staff development unit at Strathclyde that many of our staff also have similarly diverse expectations about their role and what they expect from students in the online space. But these expectations can often be quite varied and quite fuzzy and quite opaque. And sometimes we see manifestations of those expectations buried about 12 pages in the course handbook, where there's a discussion of how students should behave with one another in the forum. But these learner agreements for us were a way of bringing all of those expectations right to the fore and putting them at the very outset of the class, and I think crucially creating an opportunity for us to have a discussion with our participants about those expectations. Our participants are also our colleagues, so I think that bringing them into our confidence is something which is very, very important in delivering academic development modules. And so we've also experienced where not making the learner agreement the object of a very specific consultation can have detrimental impacts. And Katie and I will remember a participant walking into one of our courses who had, it turned out after we got to know him a little bit better, had been feeling very under pressure to participate in the module. The module wasn't his choice, he was doing it as part of his probation, and so being in his perspective, being forced to participate in a module, and then at the very first thing that he did within the module was being forced to sign a learner agreement, was something which didn't sit too well with him. And so we've learned from that experience. He was absolutely fine and he's now one of our best friends, but we've learned from that experience and really tried to ensure that we don't take anything for granted in terms of the role of the learner agreements within our classes, and that we do structure the first session of the module largely around a conversation where some of those statements in the learner agreement can be explored, they can be refined, they can be discussed, they can be challenged, and that's been, I think, very, 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 very positive in kind of utilising the full potential for the learner agreement, not just to be something that participants tick and then move on to, but really engage in a meaningful discussion where they're able to consider their expectations of us as tutors, what it means to be a good group member, and how they need to orient themselves to online learning, which is something that might be a little bit unfamiliar to them. So I'm going to hand over to Emma now, who's going to look at some of the specifics of implementing these learner agreements in a few of the blended and online modules that you lead within the academic development team.
Thanks, Sean. I'm probably going to have to ask you to advance the slides for me now. So as Sean's introduced me, so I work with Katie and Sean in the Spark programme and lead our research development courses. And I was seeing some issues, as we were all seeing some issues, that we were seeing fairly high no-show rates. So actually, these are very blended courses, as Katie said, and we have long waiting lists, but we were seeing actually on the day and the first session where people would come along, actually quite a large proportion of people just wouldn't turn up, or then they wouldn't turn up set after the next session. And this obviously has impacts on our waiting list. So we've got people on those waiting lists, and if we think there's a place taken, we can't give that to someone on the waiting list. We spend quite a lot of time before the course looking at the groupings and trying to get people into the best groups and planning activities around those groups. So of course, if we suddenly have 75% or 50% of the people turning up that we were expecting, that doesn't work. And of course, ultimately, that's going to impact the participants' experience, because we are planning to have them in a group working in a certain number of people, and that's just not going to work if we've got 4 people out of 5 missing from a group or something. So that was some of the drivers really for changing to putting the learning agreement in place. And we also added into this a self-enrollment. So on our virtual learning environment, which is my place, it's Moodle based, we're also now using self-enrollment to try and give the students, the participants, a little bit more self-responsibility in actually engaging in that the blended or the online side of what we're doing. Can you press the button, Sean? Okay, so this is what it looks like time-wise what we do. So if we've got session 1 coming up, then we would usually have a fair amount of material online in our virtual learning environment with information for the students, perhaps pre-work, and not only were people not turning up, we were finding they weren't engaging in this. So what we're doing now is about 3 weeks before the course begins, we send an email with the joining information. That joining information has the link so that they can self-enroll onto MyPlace, the virtual learning environment. And also, once they get into that, then before any of the rest of the information comes up, they have to engage with the learner agreement. Thank you. Okay, so they're self-enrolling on MyPlace, and then we're asking them to read and agree to, we're calling it tutor and participant responsibility sometimes rather than learner agreement, to really try and emphasise that this is about us working in partnership with our students, not that we're forcing these obligations upon them. And so then from an administrative point of view, then about a week before the course, we'll go in and we'll check that have they ticked that box, and we assume that anyone that hasn't ticked that box is not completing the course. And then we're able to withdraw anyone that hasn't completed it and offer places out to anyone on the waiting list. This I actually had one person who, when we withdrew them from the course, I got quite a direct email suggesting that this was quite an unusual way to run a course. And when I explained that we had this high no-show rate, this high dropout rate, and it was an issue for, for the course participants and for people on the waiting list, they actually came back and said, actually, I completely understand. And if it hadn't been for this, I wouldn't have engaged with the online materials. And after that, they really understood what we were trying to do. So actually, it really, even the withdrawal piece, as long as there's a kind of a back and forth, there can be really beneficial in helping with that engagement. Okay, and then Sean, can you? Okay. And so one thing we're finding with this, and I'll show you some numbers in a minute, is actually this has really helped get rid of the no-show rate and the dropout rate, because people are making that decision beforehand as to whether they're coming along. So they're understanding what the course is about. As Sean said, people come from a variety of backgrounds, different expectations, and now they're actually, they perhaps didn't realise that this wasn't just 4 sessions in a classroom with someone, that there is a significant amount of work outside of this. And so by using the learner agreements, they're beginning to understand that. And so they know what they're signing up for. So they're actually coming and they're ready for it. They don't suddenly on session 1 go, oh, I didn't realise that was what I had to do. I'm not coming back. And so, of course, that's really helped us with all of the waiting lists and everything to really, overcome those problems. And so then just having some look at the data we have around it. So the 2 courses that I've used this in are Building a Successful Research Career, which is a really popular core course in the programme, and another course, Research Bidding and Design. So I was seeing retention rates, well, pretty variable, but 73%, 38%, 69%, all over the place. On average, I was losing 50% of the people who were signed up. And actually, after using those learner agreements in self-enrollment, we were up to 80 to 90% kind of people retention by the end of the time we got to the course. And as we've got here, 1 course was cancelled, but actually that's really important, because that means we weren't running a course and all the effort and all the time for the participants and for us, when we're only going to have 4 people turning up. So actually, that's really benefited us as well. And now I'm going to hand back over. Thank you.
And of course, Katie, the core module that you lead has also had some experience with this approach to self-enrollment and using learner agreements. So it's an opportunity for you to share anything else.
Absolutely. So we were able to attain a higher retention rate, but we also had a higher retention rate to begin with. And I think that's perhaps due to some other circumstances, such as this is the required class that all staff need to do. This is the one that they're told to do. So that the close to 100% retention may be partly to do with that. But it's also it's allowed us to have a conversation with participants. So when challenges emerge within the class, we've been able to go back to that learner agreement and use that to structure a conversation to support participants through particular parts of the course. That's been really useful. Of course, within the core learning and teaching class, it's also allowed us to model an approach that we think our staff may be able to do within their own classes. So many of them have been really quite interested to see how it works. We've had a number of really engaging discussions within the classroom about learner agreements, about what helped through the learner agreements. Sean's already told you about the guy who found it really quite difficult as an opener to the class to engage with that. And we've had many really productive discussions around that and how to try to support students within our participants' classes. So it's really allowed some changes university-wide in terms of how people use these learner agreements to work really closely with their students. So I'll pass back to you, Sean.
Sure. So I guess, although we're still, I would recognise we're at quite an early stage with kind of, refining the process around self-enrolment and pre-boarding, that process with which the learner agreement is a really important element within. And we think that in the structure we have something which is quite useful. All indications are that it's had a positive impact on a number of processes related to the early portion of our modules. And we think that in the move to the kind of whole-scale move to blended and online learning that's happening across the sector, simple implementation of a process that involves some kind of a learner contract can be very, very useful in helping those expectations that we have of students and that students have of their tutors to come to the fore, of providing opportunities to structure meaningful conversations at the beginning, and of also having some sort of a document that can be returned to when challenges are faced. And we really feel that this is something that holds great promise, and we're keen to really expand and explore this in as much detail as we can moving forward. And we do recognise that there's a lot of, there's a long road ahead, and that there is scope to really further refine what we do. I think, there are lots of questions if do participants in the module, despite all of our best efforts, do they still adopt quite a passive approach to the learner agreement, simply ticking it so that it unlocks all of the activities that follow in pre-boarding and then moving on and not giving it a second thought? Is there is there a further scope for helping it to be, a part of a conversation, or even something where there's elements of co-creation, where the students themselves are actually involved in maybe not structuring the entire learner agreement, but in certainly giving shape to some of those elements. Is there a way in which it could be done as a collaborative wiki, for example, so that groups of students are creating their own kind of group contract or a terms of reference for how they interact with one another within those groups? And are there opportunities for for us as tutors to just provide a little bit of structure to support students to do that and take more ownership of the entire process? And I guess that's where we can probably leave things with a little bit of an invitation to those of you who are joining us in this presentation, that if you have suggestions and ideas, or if you have your own experiences of using learner agreements, we would certainly love to hear from you and love to hear what you're learning, and think about how maybe we can support one another moving forward to gain more experience of this. It's certainly something that we're keen to do more evaluation around, and something that we're keen to explore in much more detail. So a little bit of collaboration with colleagues in other institutions would be absolutely fantastic, really, really valuable for us. So thanks so much for giving us of your time. Thanks for, hopefully the opportunity to continue our conversation. Hope you found this useful. We hope it's prompted some new ideas or some new thoughts about how you deliver blended and online learning. And we'll just say cheerio, I think, from everyone here at Strathclyde. Thanks so much.